How many of you are familiar with these words? I'm going to say a couple of words here. And I think this would be a good time for you to go ahead and raise your hands. On most of these, you can raise your hands. Okay? How many of you are familiar with the term rerun? Rerun. Rerun. Like a rerun on TV. You guys familiar with that? How many of you are familiar with the words rewind? How about replay? How about play it again, Sam? All right. I like those words. I also am familiar with those words. I like those words. I enjoy reruns on TV, whether it's something old from when I was a kid, like Perry Mason, or whether it's a movie that I missed the first time through. I like reruns. Doesn't matter to me if it's what is almost ancient technology now, when I say DVDs or CDs, and we can even dip back to video cassette tapes. Yeah, now I really went back to the Ice Age when I say that one. All right, I like them. And the reason why I like them is because if I've missed it the first time, I can get it the second time. And if I have a DVR player, that is even easier to get. I like them because if I slow it down and rewind and come back in slow motion again, if there was something really specific that I wanted to see or to get or to try and understand, hot dog, I could do it. I could see somebody, if I'm trying to see how the bad guy got the drop on the good guy, I could put it in that thing that's so slow, and I could actually see him go backwards, and then I could see him come forward and go, boom. Just to see how they do it. I like rewinds, replays. There really is a reason for all of this. I'm going to talk to you today about a replay, a rewind in the Scripture. The more I read John, the book of John, the more I read John, the more I am realizing that God is very patient, that Jesus was very patient, that the Holy Spirit is very patient, and that if we don't get something that's important, there will be a chance to get it. And I'm calling that a rewind. And we are going to go tonight, if you have Bibles or whatever it is that you're using. If you want to turn to Mark, the 8th chapter. I believe this is a rewind. And I believe that the reason for this rewind was because the disciples didn't get it. And I think all of us have times in our lives when we get rewinds. One of the things I'm hoping that you take away from this is sometimes when we go through something and we struggle, and then we see God do something miraculous, or he do something that's just that just hit the spot, and that really helps us. Sometimes when that happens, we get all excited, our hands are up, we're doing a little jig, and we're just really excited because God has proven himself to be God in our lives. And then maybe 2 or 3 months later, maybe 2 or 3 years later, we face something and we say, Is this deja vu? Haven't I already been down this road before? Haven't I already seen this kind of thing before? And then we start to cry out to God, and we start to, oh, I think God's forgotten me. I think he doesn't like me anymore. I think that I messed up so bad that not even he can help me. Oh, God, just take me home. Let me be done. You guys just need to quit that.
Amen.
All right? Sometimes we have rewinds because God is trying to make sure we get something important. In John the 6th chapter, and we covered this several weeks ago, in John the 6th chapter, Jesus feeds the 5,000. And after he feeds the 5,000, he walks on water. And after he walks on water and they catch up to him, you know what he does? Because they were hungry for food and they wanted Jesus to give them physical food, Jesus starts talking to him, and we call that the bread of life discourse. And he talks about how he is the bread of life. And when he calls himself the bread of life, he means this: if you will eat of me, read my word, drink in my word, if you will consume me, I will be life to you. I will meet your physical needs. I will meet your spiritual needs. He, Jesus, is the bread the bread of life. And the thing that I like about that, when he says it, he puts I am in front of that. I am, if you remember back to Moses, has to do with Moses at the burning bush. And it means I am whatever it is I need to be when I need to be it. He takes care of us. He took care of that physical need that they have, and then he's breaking that down for them and to say to them, this is not just a physical thing, it's a spiritual thing. That's why I'm here, so that you can eat of me, so that you can drink of me. My words are spirit, John 6:63, and they are life. The disciples were there. They were there for that whole thing. They seen that whole thing unfold. They were a part of it. They helped pass out the bread that didn't end. About 6 months later is where we're at now in Mark the 8th chapter. About 6 months later. And we have the story of the feeding of the 4,000. And guess who's there? The disciples. They're all there. And I find it real interesting as we look at how this unfolds. I find this real interesting. I will be reading parts of this, but mostly I'm just going to tell you the story. So the people had been with Jesus for 3 days. And my guess is for those that had brought food with them, they probably hadn't planned on staying for 3 days. But he had been with them for 3 days. And now it's the third day, and Jesus is saying it's time for them to go home. And he's looking at them and realizing that probably many of them have not eaten that third day. They have been listening to him teach. They have been listening to him preach. They have probably been watching miracles take place. They are out in a desert place. They are out in a wilderness. And Jesus looks upon this crowd. It says 4,000 men. If you read Matthew, it'll tell you 4,000 men. Matthew, the 15th and 16th chapters, you'll find what we're talking about today. But we're focusing in on Mark 8. If you will read that, 4,000 men plus women and children. Probably 12,000 plus people there. And they're out in this wilderness space that can hold 12,000 people. And Jesus looks out. He probably sees that they're tired. He probably senses that they're hungry. And all of a sudden, another wave of compassion comes over him. And it would be an interesting study if you want to do this. New Testament, the Gospels specifically. If you will look at the word compassion for the Gospels, and when it says that Jesus had compassion or had pity, which is not a bad thing, it's again part of that compassion thing. When he had compassion on people, miraculous things take place. I don't know if you realize this or not, but Jesus has compassion on us. He has compassion on our nation. He's in charge. He's in control. He looked out upon that group of people and he had compassion. And then he looked at his disciples. And he said to his disciples, we cannot send them away when they're hungry. Because if we do, they might faint on their way to their homes. And they've got a long ways to go. We can't send them away without feeding them. Where are we going to find food? He looks at his disciples. Can you believe that? He looks at his disciples and he says, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And you know what the disciples said? They said, there ain't no food around here. We can't begin to make them full. What are you going to do? We can't help you. Because there's no place where we can get bread for all these folks. We're out in the wilderness, man. Jesus, did you forget where we're at? I can just see them shaking their heads. Jesus, do you have any idea what you're asking us to do? There's not some 7-Eleven down the street. There's no quick shop over there. No. So Jesus, he is so patient. He is so kind. So you know what he does? He probably just shook his head and he gave him another chance. I mean, he gave him another chance. He said, how many loaves of bread do you have? So he's giving them another chance. He's so good. And you know what they said? 7. Just like there's silence now, there was silence then probably. And Jesus looked at them. All we got is 7. He probably said, anything else? Anything else? Anything? Oh yeah, Jesus, we got a few little fishies. Silence. So and then he just shook his head and he went up front. He said to the crowd, I'm going to do this my way. He wasn't from the South, so he didn't say it this way. You all sit down. All right. He said, sit down. So people sat down. And he said, bring me the loaves, bring me the fishies. He prayed. He gave thanks for them. It's real interesting to look at the words that were used. He prayed and he gave thanks and he broke the stuff and he began passing it out. That means that the miracle, the words that are used, if you look at the words that are used there in the text, it means that the miracle started with Jesus. He broke, and as they passed it out, it continued to multiply. That's just an awesome picture. And it just kept going, and it just kept going, and it just kept going, and it just kept going. And everybody ate till they were full. And after they ate, Jesus said to the disciples, go pick up the leftovers. I'm thinking, really? Because they ain't figured it out yet, guys. They ain't figured this thing out yet. So, they go pick up the leftovers. Now, when Jesus did the same thing 6 months before, same thing, only more people, 5,000 people. Anybody remember how many basketfuls they had left? They had 12, all right? That 12 was probably about this size, okay? Maybe even a little bit smaller. To be honest with you, I imagine that is a little bit smaller, okay? I'm looking at the words that are used for basket. It's about like this, all right? They had 12 left over, okay? They ended up with 7 left over after everybody had eaten until they were full. They use a different word for basket. If you don't get what I mean, I think Jesus is trying to make a point here. I think 7 of these, and this is small. The word that they use for basket is the same word that they used if you read in Acts. I'm not remembering the chapter and verse, but if you read in Acts, Paul is in a city and they're trying to help him get out of the city, okay? So they put him in a basket and they lowered him, and that was a basket that was probably like this, only 3 or 4 times bigger. Same word. And then it also said, another commentator came along and said, oh yeah, this kind of basket, this is the kind of basket that the Roman soldiers used to carry the stuff that they needed to carry. So I'm imagining something that's big enough so that you can have people like this carrying it. So this was the biggest one that we had at home. So that's what I brought, because it's still, look at this. Which would you rather have if you were really hungry? 12 of these or 7 bigger than these? Yeah. This is what I'm after. All right? They gathered up 7. They went in the boat. They went across the sea. When they get across the sea, they run into the Pharisees. And the Pharisees came to Jesus. They started arguing with him. What they wanted was a sign so that he would prove himself to be who he said he was. He said that he was the Son of God. And in saying that, he's saying that he is God because he's one with God. They're trying to get him to do a sign. He just shakes his head. He takes a deep sigh. You can see the words that he says in Matthew, and he just says, there'll be no sign that's given. Not giving you a sign. They get in the boat again to go to the other side. And when they get in the boat, the disciples go, oh, rats. Shucks. Rats. Guess what? We just have 1 loaf of bread for supper. And they're all concerned. Really? Really? Anyway, they are just really concerned. We just got 1 loaf of bread. And Jesus hears them talking. You know, I'm sure that they were like, we don't want to get the master mad. I think he hears everything. All right? And so he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Herodians. That's what he says. Because he hears them talking about, we forgot supper. We only have 1 loaf of bread. Really? Really? You forgot supper? Really, guys? And then I think they're probably mad. Well, it's not my fault. I wasn't supposed to bring supper. He was supposed to bring supper. Because they're offended. Look at all we do, and just because we forgot a little supper. Yeah, they're missing it. They are missing the point. They're looking at physical. Jesus is looking at spiritual. If you go back and you read the beginning of the 7th chapter of Mark, what you will find is that Jesus again is being assaulted by the Pharisees. And they are coming and arguing with him because his disciples don't wash their hands before they eat, because they don't go through the ceremonial washing of washing their plates and washing. And that word that's used for washing is the same word that's used for baptism. So because they're not baptizing their hands, and because they're not baptizing their plates and their silverware, they're shaking their finger at Jesus and saying, what kind of a teacher are you? You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Why don't they follow the rules like the rest of us follow the rules? That's leaven. That's just evilness. And when they came and they approached him and said, you need to give us a sign. If you're really going to be the Son of God, then you need to give us a sign. That's evil. That's leaven. When the New Testament uses the term leaven, and it says beware, you know what? It's never a good thing. It's never a good thing. And so he is talking about this. There's false teaching going on. They're saying that the letter of the law is more important than the spirit of the law. Let me give you an example of that. David was hungry. He had some guys following him back in the Old Testament. David was hungry, and he was already starting to run away from Saul. He had to get away. And so they were hungry. They needed to have their physical spirits revived. And so you know what? They go in, and the priest where they stopped at, they had the bread that was for their service. And he said, we don't have anything else here. It's been hard times here. We don't have anything else here. And then he said, this is what the priest said. He said, go get some of that bread. Go get some of that bread. You know what? That's the spirit of the law. And then I like the idea that it's bread. What does Jesus say in the 6th chapter? I am the bread of life. You think that bread didn't give life to those guys, both physically and spiritually, to know that they had a God who cares for them? Oh my goodness. And that God provides for them? Oh man, that gave them life. Yeah, it did. And so, that's what he is talking about. And they probably just looked at him, because that section just ends just like that. Just stops. Just stops. Now they're someplace else. They walk into town. I think that these verses, Matthew doesn't carry this story. Mark does. I think that these verses are telling us Jesus' commentary on what has just taken place the last few days here. He walks into this town. These friends have gathered together. They have brought their friend who can't see. He's blind. And so they come in to town with him. They bring him to Jesus. And they said, Jesus, please heal this man. And so Jesus is looking at him. And Jesus says, okay. And he takes his hand and he takes him outside the city. And once he gets outside the city, then he puts spittle on his hands, his fingers, And then he prays for the man. And he says, open up your eyes. Can you see? And the man says, I see men walking around like trees. Jesus doesn't have a tirade. He doesn't go, you got it wrong. No, 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 no. He doesn't do any of that. He doesn't say, oh, you of little faith. Why did I even waste my time with you? He doesn't do any of that. You know what he does? He says, and he takes his hands and he puts them on the man's eyes. And he prays and he says, okay, open them now. And he sees the way that he's supposed to see. You know what, guys? Sometimes we don't get things the first time. And this is the only scripture, I think this is the only story about somebody being healed in the New Testament, in the Gospels. This is the only story of somebody being healed at the first time Jesus did his deal, that the man wasn't completely healed. I think what Jesus is saying is this. I think it's a commentary on what's just taken place with the disciples the last few days. Don't you get it? Don't you know? You still, even though you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you still don't get it? And then he just shook his head. I think what he's saying is sometimes we don't get it the first time. So when we don't get it the first time, they had the first time with the 5,000. And they didn't get it. 6 months later, they didn't remember. They run into the exact same thing. Jesus said, just like he said in John the 6th chapter, he looked up on the crowd and he felt compassion for them. In John chapter 6, it was the first day. In Mark 8, it's the third day. He felt compassion. And when he says, we need to feed him, what are we going to do? And he looked at him. Well, we can't do it. Sometimes in your lives, when you struggle, and you begin to cry out to Jesus, and in the middle of that cry, you just stop and say, you know, I've been down this road before. I don't know if you're listening to me or not. I don't know if you care. I don't know what your deal is today, Jesus, but and sometimes you just walk away. Do you not remember? Do you not remember that morning when he woke you up? Do you not remember when, in many cases, he put something in your stomach? Food. Do you not remember that in many cases you had a place to sleep last night? Do you not remember in many cases where you have a job or you have income of some sort? Do you not remember how God took care of your friend when you went and talked to your friend who was sick and prayed for him and they got better? Do you not remember that when you cried out to Jesus in the middle of the night, he healed your broken heart? Do you not remember those times? And then you come into a hard time. Have you forgotten that Jesus is the bread of life? Have you forgotten that he's interested in you? He knows you have. Is he offended? He sends a rerun. He sends a rerun. Terry, you want to come up, please? He sends a rerun, guys. The God that we serve, he is not an odd God. He is not a God who is so angry with you that he wants to throw lightning bolts your way. You say, well, my life circumstances don't reflect that. Well, I don't have answers for everything. I don't know why we have to suffer sometimes. Maybe it's because he's trying to get our attention. And what I'm saying when I say that is maybe struggles come And those struggles help us know when we rely upon God, he takes care of us. When we see him as the bread of life, who takes care of both of our physical needs and our spiritual needs. If we will consume him, he will consume us. And if I can take something from Brian's sermon from a couple of weeks ago, if we make good decisions, if we make good choices, if we decide to pursue him with all that we have, and we eat and drink his word, maybe we'll recognize if there's things that we don't get. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm just pretty slow. I have a lot of reruns. And sometimes when I realize it's a rerun, I go, oh man, really? Okay, God, help me. Help me to remember and to know that you are the bread of life. You are the bread of life. And then, if we continue on in Mark, for that moment, Peter gets it because Jesus gives him another chance. And Jesus says, who do men say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Matthew records it saying that you are the Son of the living God. Peter got it. In that moment, and for that moment, he got it. Let's pray.